The morning I found out, I was standing at the kitchen window on Gaston Street, watching a mockingbird work through its repertoire on the oak branch closest to the house. Gerald used to sit at that window with his sketchbook on Saturday mornings, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him while he tried to catch whatever the bird was doing in a few quick lines. Some mornings, I still half expect to see the cup on the sill when I come downstairs. 4 years is not long enough to stop expecting things. The phone rang at 8:47. I know the time because I had just checked it to calculate whether I had enough space before my 10 o'clock walk with Dolores. The caller was Nathan Holt from Aldrich Gallery on Jones Street. I have known Nathan in a professional capacity for 11 years, long enough to trust his eye for regional work, not long enough to call him a friend. His voice had a particular careful quality that morning, the kind people use when they are unsure how much someone already knows. "Lorraine," he said, "I want to confirm a few details before we proceed with the scheduling. Travis mentioned you had been in conversation with him about the arrangement." I told him I did not know what arrangement he was referring to. There was a pause of about 4 seconds. I counted them without meaning to. "The consignment," he said. "Travis brought in 17 of Gerald's pieces last Tuesday. Nadine has the full inventory list. We were thinking a spring show, late April or early May, and I was going to reach out this week anyway to discuss pricing and terms." I sat down at the kitchen table. The chair made the small sound it always makes when you pull it out, the one I have been meaning to fix for 2 years. I did not speak for a moment, because I was doing a particular kind of calculation, the kind that has nothing to do with numbers. I was calculating what this call meant against what I already knew, and the result was becoming clear before I finished the equation. "Nathan," I said, "I appreciate you calling me directly. I need to ask you to hold everything exactly where it is until we have had a chance to speak more fully. Nothing signed, nothing moved, nothing priced." He agreed without hesitation. That told me something. Whatever Travis had said, Nathan was not entirely comfortable with the arrangement. Gerald Whitfield spent 31 years as a visual arts teacher at Savannah Arts Academy. I taught English at the same school for 28 of those years, and we met in the faculty lounge in September of 1987 over a disagreement about whether the copy machine was broken or simply being operated incorrectly. Gerald was wrong, as it turned out, but he was wrong with such good humor that I forgave him before the end of the school day. He painted in every hour that was left over from teaching and from the ordinary requirements of a life. He had a studio in the room we had originally designated as a guest bedroom, which became clear within the first 2 years of our marriage was not a role that room was actually going to play. He worked in watercolor and in oil, usually in series, and he had a habit of completing things in clusters, 7 or 8 paintings in 3 intensive weeks, then a fallow month, then 6 more. He said the silence between the work was part of the work. I believed him, though I also noticed that the fallow months tended to coincide with baseball season. When he was diagnosed in October of 2021 with pancreatic cancer, the collection in his studio numbered 43 paintings. He continued working through the winter, and by the time he died in March of 2022, the number had grown to 47. The last 4 were small, 10-inch square studies of the garden outside the studio window in different weather, and they have a particular quality that the earlier work does not, a kind of economy, as though he was thinking about what was essential and only that. All 47 are signed in the lower right corner in his particular hand, a small capital G and a W that looks, if you look at it from the right angle, slightly like a bird mid-flight. I was with Gerald when he wrote the letter of instruction. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in early December of 2021. Outside the window, the oak was bare, which is not always the case in Savannah in December, but that year the cold had come early. Gerald was already thin from the treatment. He had his yellow legal pad, and I had my laptop, and he dictated and I typed. The letter was specific about everything it needed to be specific about. It stated that the collection of original paintings belonging to Gerald Whitfield, consisting of all works in his possession at the time of his death, was not to be sold, loaned, consigned, or transferred in any capacity without the written consent of Lorraine Whitfield during her lifetime. It named me as the sole authority over every decision regarding the collection. It named our son Travis as executor of Gerald's estate with respect to his financial accounts, his vehicle, and his share of the property on Gaston Street, but it explicitly excluded the paintings from Travis's executor authority. That exclusion was Gerald's idea, not mine. He was precise about it. He said he wanted it on paper so that no one ever had to wonder. We drove together to the office of Barbara Keene on Drayton Street on the afternoon of December 9, 2021. Barbara has handled our estate planning for 9 years. She read the letter, asked 2 clarifying questions, and had it notarized before 5 o'clock. She retained 1 copy in Gerald's file and gave us 2 originals. I keep one in the manila folder in the second drawer of Gerald's desk. Travis was not present at Barbara's office that day, but I showed him the letter afterward at Christmas, and Barbara mailed him a copy with a cover letter explaining its terms. He read it. He nodded. He said, "That makes sense." I had not given much thought to Nadine Forsyth in relation to Gerald's paintings, not at first. When Travis brought her to Savannah for the first time 18 months ago, she seemed like someone who paid attention to the rooms she was in. Not in a calculating way, or at least not in a way that registered as calculating immediately. She worked in event coordination in Atlanta and spoke about it with the casual fluency of someone who had been doing it long enough to see all its patterns. She complimented the house without overdoing it. She asked about Gerald's work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. The first thing I noticed was the photograph. At Thanksgiving last year, I stepped away from the table to check on something in the kitchen, and when I came back through the hallway I could see, through the studio doorway, that Nadine was inside. She was standing in front of Gerald's last large-format oil, a marsh scene in low light, 12 by 18 inches, completed in October of 2021, and she was holding her phone up taking a picture of it. I asked her, pleasantly, not to photograph the works. She apologized immediately and put the phone away. The moment passed without incident. In February, during a conversation that had begun as a discussion of Atlanta real estate, Nadine mentioned that original art by regional painters could be a strong asset class if the provenance was solid and the work was well documented. She looked at me when she said it. I looked back at her. We moved on to something else. In April, Travis called one evening and asked, in a careful, glancing way, whether I had given any thought to what I might eventually want to do with the paintings. He said it the way people say things when someone else has suggested they say it. I told him I had not made any decisions and did not expect to soon. He said he understood, and we talked about other things, and I put the phone down and sat with a feeling I did not quite have words for yet. The early warnings in a family often look like nothing. They look like an offhand question, a photograph being taken, a comment that touches something, and then moves on before you can press on it. I have spent my life in a classroom learning to read rooms, and the skill transfers, but it transfers imperfectly. I was not certain enough of what I was seeing to act on it. I extended good faith. That is my habit, and it is usually the right one, and occasionally it is a liability. After Nathan's call, I sat at the kitchen table for 22 minutes. The mockingbird finished its business in the oak and left. I watched it go. Then I opened the second drawer of Gerald's desk and took out the manila folder and read the letter of instruction from beginning to end, once, slowly. Then I called Barbara Keene. Her assistant put me through in under 3 minutes. Barbara listened without interrupting while I described Nathan's call and what he had told me about the 17 paintings. When I finished, she said, "Lorraine, the letter of instruction was filed with Gerald's estate and notarized before his death. The consignment cannot proceed without your written authorization. Travis does not have the executor authority to offer those works. It's unambiguous. I asked her what I needed to do. She said, "First, bring me the original. Second, don't contact Travis yet, not until I've put something in writing. Third, call Nathan back today and tell him to take no further steps pending written clarification of ownership authority. No pricing, no contracts, no conversations with buyers." I did those 3 things in that order. Barbara drafted a formal notice the same afternoon. It was addressed to Aldrich Gallery, attention Nathan Holt, and copied to Travis. It stated that the consignment of any works from the estate of Gerald Whitfield required the written authorization of Lorraine Whitfield, as specified in the notarized letter of instruction dated December 9, 2021, and that no such authorization had been given, and that any further steps taken without it would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. The language was precise and even. I read it twice. Gerald would have appreciated it. I asked Nathan to send me the inventory sheet of the 17 works. He sent it that evening. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and read through it carefully, and the reading took longer than it should have because I kept stopping to think. Nadine had not chosen arbitrarily. She had not grabbed the nearest paintings or the ones easiest to transport. She had chosen 17 of the 47 with a clear logic. 7 from the Marsh series, which was Gerald's most mature, sustained work and which Nathan had been wanting to show for years. 3 from the interior studies, which were more immediately accessible to buyers who didn't know Gerald's name. The pieces she had selected had estimated individual values ranging from $2,000 to $11,000, and Nathan's informal total estimate for the group was approximately $93,000. She had done her research. She knew which pieces had the clearest market appeal. She knew what a spring show at Aldrich would do for name recognition among Savannah's collector community. She had thought about this carefully and over time, and she had persuaded Travis to go along with it, and she had been counting on the assumption that I either would not find out or would not have the means to respond effectively. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting with that inventory sheet. There was anger, of the cold and quiet kind, but underneath it there was something sadder, which was the recognition that the person in this situation I understood least was my own son. I understand Nadine Forsyth well enough. She saw an opportunity and calculated that the widow on Gaston Street was too deep in grief to notice. That is a wrong assessment of who I am, but I can follow the logic of it. What I could not follow, and what I sat with much longer than the anger, was why Travis had said yes. He had read the letter. He had nodded. He had said that makes sense. And then 18 months later he had loaded 17 of his father's paintings into the back of a car and driven them to Jones Street. I poured myself a glass of water, and I sat in the studio looking at the walls, and I let myself think about that fully, without softening it. Then I made a decision about how I wanted to proceed, which was carefully, cleanly, and without escalation beyond what the situation required. I sat with all of that for one full evening, in the studio, with the lights on. I did not call Travis. I called Nathan the following morning and asked him, as a professional courtesy, to please not mention my contact with Barbara or the incoming letter to Travis or to Nadine before Monday morning. Nathan agreed with something that sounded like relief. He is a good dealer, which means he prefers clean transactions, and this situation had not been presenting as clean. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I drove to Aldrich Gallery on Jones Street. I parked in the lot behind the building. I walked in through the front. Nathan met me near the door with the expression of a man who is glad the resolution has arrived in person. I took a seat in the small consulting area near the back of the gallery where Nathan holds client meetings. I placed on the table, in 3 separate piles, Barbara's formal notice, the original notarized letter of instruction, and Nathan's inventory sheet with a handwritten note from me identifying each of the 17 selected works by title or description. Then I waited. The gallery was quiet at that hour, a Monday with no event scheduled. Light came through the front windows and fell across the plank floors at a low angle. I have always liked Aldrich as a space. Gerald showed there once, in 2014, in a group exhibition of regional landscape painters. He was nervous the week before, in the way he was always nervous before things, quietly and without making it anyone else's problem. The opening was on a Thursday evening in November, and he stood near the back and talked to people who came to him and said very little about the work, except thank you when someone said they found it moving. I kept that memory in mind while I sat there. I thought about him being nervous and not showing it, and I thought about what it means to care for something someone else has made. Travis and Nadine arrived at 9:23. I watched them come through the door. Travis saw me first. His face went through 4 or 5 expressions in the space of 2 seconds. The last one settled into something that was not quite shame and not quite relief, the look of a person who has been waiting, perhaps without admitting it, for the situation to be brought to a halt. Nadine's composure was better than Travis's. She smiled and said, "Lorraine, I didn't know you'd be here." I said, "I know you didn't." Nathan made a quiet exit to the back. Travis sat down. Nadine remained standing for a moment, and then sat as well. There was a small painting on the wall behind her, not one of Gerald's, a coastal scene by a living artist whose name I have since forgotten. I mention it only because I remember looking at it briefly while I composed what I wanted to say. "Gerald spent 31 years building this collection," I said. I did not raise my voice. I had decided before I arrived that I would not raise my voice. Not because I was not angry. I was, with a particular cold precision, but because raising my voice would have made this about feeling, and this was about something older and more durable than feeling. He wrote the letter of instruction knowing exactly what he was asking for, and he had it notarized so that what he wanted did not depend on anyone's goodwill, including mine. It was not distrust, it was clarity. He wanted everyone, at every future moment, to know exactly where things stood. I looked at Nadine, then at Travis. "There is no consignment," I said. "There was never going to be one. Barbara's letter explains the legal position fully. Nathan has agreed to return the 17 works to Gaston Street, and they will be back in the studio by Thursday." Nadine said, "Lorraine, I think if we could talk through what we were proposing, you'd see there's room for—" I said, "The letter of instruction does not leave room for interpretation. Gerald's language was specific and intentional, and it was witnessed and notarized in the presence of our attorney. There is no proposal that changes that." Travis had been looking at the table. He looked up. He is 52 years old, and he has Gerald's eyes and the particular slump of a person who knows they have done something they cannot fully justify. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. "I know you are," I said. "We'll talk about the rest of it when you're ready." Nadine said nothing further. She had understood, with whatever facility she has for reading situations, that this one was finished. The paintings came back, Thursday afternoon. Nathan's assistant and a colleague carried them in carefully, and I directed them to the studio, and when they were done, I thanked them and stood in the doorway while they drove away. I spent some time in the studio after that. The Marsh series runs along the east wall. 7 paintings of the same stretch of water, in different light, different seasons, different weather. Gerald painted them over 4 years, starting the month after our younger child left for college, when he finally had enough quiet in the house to listen to what the water was telling him. He said once that the same subject painted repeatedly was not repetition, it was accumulation. Every canvas holds a different truth about the same thing. I sat in his chair, the one with the worn armrests, the one he could sit in for 3 hours and not notice the time passing. The thing about 31 years of a life built alongside another person is that it teaches you the difference between what needs to be acted on and what simply needs to be felt. Not everything requires a response. Not every wrong requires a confrontation that runs longer than its usefulness. Some things you handle and then you set down, because the handling was the point, not the carrying. What I carried out of that Monday morning at Aldrich Gallery was not triumph. It was something quieter and harder to name, the specific satisfaction of having done the thing that was asked of me before the asking was ever necessary. Gerald had thought about this. He had sat at the kitchen table on a cold December afternoon and thought about what he wanted and put it in writing and had it witnessed, because he understood that care requires form. Feeling is not enough. Intention is not enough. You have to put it on paper and sign it and have someone stamp it with their seal. He trusted me to keep the copy in the drawer. I kept it. Travis called the following Sunday evening. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. He told me things about the preceding 18 months that I had not known, and I told him some things I had observed, and we were honest with each other in the way that is only possible after something has broken open and been examined. What he said about Nadine, I will keep to myself. What he said about his own choices, I accepted without judgment, because judgment was not what the conversation needed. He came to Savannah 3 weeks later. We sat in the studio together, which we had not done since the memorial, and I made coffee, and he walked around the room looking at the paintings the way he used to do when he was 12 years old, and would come in on Saturday mornings and sit on the floor while Gerald painted, and they talked about baseball and about whatever was happening at school. Gerald called those mornings his best working hours, because having Travis in the room kept him from overthinking. We are going to be all right, Travis and I. Not immediately, and not without effort, but going in that direction. People who try to take what does not belong to them are usually counting on something. They are counting on grief making the person slower. They are counting on uncertainty making the person doubt. They are counting on the assumption that the person who has lost the most does not have enough left to protect what remains. Gerald used to say, about painting, that the best thing you can do is know your materials before you need them. Know your brushes. Know how your pigment behaves on the particular paper you use. Know it in your hands before the moment arrives, so the moment can be about the work and not about scrambling. He knew his materials. He made his arrangements while he still could. He sat at the kitchen table with his legal pad and his careful thinking, and he said what he needed to say, and we drove to Drayton Street, and Barbara put her seal on it. He went home and made dinner, and did not mention the letter again. He did not need to. He had done the thing, and the thing was done, and now it was in the drawer. That letter lived in the second drawer of his desk for 4 years without ever being needed. When it was needed, it was there. That is not a story about what I did. It is a story about what he did, years before either of us knew we would need it. The love in it is the preparation. The care is in the specificity. The 47 paintings are still on the walls of the studio on Gaston Street, where they belong, in the particular afternoon light that comes through the east window and turns Gerald's marsh scenes into something I do not have words for. I do not need words for it. I just need to keep going in to look at them, and I do, most mornings, on the way to the kitchen, the way people visit a room they have always loved without ever needing a reason to.